On the 25th of June, 1876, in the sun-scorched valley of Little Bighorn, Montana Territory, the Seventh Cavalry, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, prepared for a confrontation that would echo through history. The air hung heavy with dust and tension as Custer, a flamboyant and ambitious officer, led approximately 650 men toward an encampment of Lakota, Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. Opposing them were the legendary leaders Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Lakota spiritual guide, and Crazy Horse, an Oglala Lakota war chief, commanding a coalition of over 2,000 warriors. The core metric of this clash, a staggering numerical disparity with Custer's forces outnumbered nearly 3-1. The scene opens with the relentless Montana sun beating down on Custer's column, their blue uniforms stained with sweat and dust. Hooves thunder across the rolling hills, and the glint of sabers catches the light. Custer, astride his horse, surveys the horizon with a confidence born of past victories against native tribes. His reputation as a fearless commander forged during the Civil War and earlier Indian campaigns precedes him. Yet, unbeknownst to him, the vast encampment along the Little Bighorn River teems with warriors united by a shared resolve to protect their way of life. The question looms: how could a seasoned commander leading a disciplined cavalry face defeat against a coalition of indigenous warriors deemed irregular by the standards of the United States Army? This moment is not merely a prelude to battle, but a collision of worlds. The United States, driven by westward expansion and the discovery of gold in the Black Hills, had violated treaties, most notably the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868, which promised the Lakota and their allies sovereignty over their sacred lands. Sitting Bull, a visionary leader, had rallied disparate tribes into a formidable alliance, their unity forged in resistance to encroachment. Crazy Horse, renowned for his tactical brilliance, embodied the fierce independence of the Lakota. Together they stood as the last bastion against an encroaching tide. The stage is set for a confrontation that will test the limits of courage, strategy, and hubris. The roots of the Battle of Little Bighorn, fought on the 25th of June, 1876 in Montana Territory, stretch deep into the turbulent history of United States expansion and indigenous resistance. The Lakota, Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho, under the leadership of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, faced an existential threat. The United States Army, represented by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his Seventh Cavalry, numbered approximately 650 men. The Indigenous coalition, by contrast, boasted over 2,000 warriors, a force united by a shared determination to defend their lands and way of life. A critical metric underscores this conflict: the violation of the Treaty of Fort Laramie, signed in 1868, which guaranteed the Black Hills to the Lakota, only to be undermined by the discovery of gold in 1874. The Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota and known as Pahasapa, became the flashpoint of this struggle. The United States, driven by economic ambition and manifest destiny, ignored treaty obligations when prospectors flooded the region. The government demanded that the Lakota and their allies relocate to reservations, a policy enforced through military campaigns. Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Lakota spiritual leader, refused to comply, declaring, "I do not want to sell any land to the government. This is my country, and I intend to stay here." His words, recorded by contemporaries, reflect a resolute stand against dispossession. Crazy Horse, an Oglala Lakota war chief, complemented Sitting Bull's vision with unmatched martial prowess, earning a reputation as a leader who could outmaneuver even the most seasoned cavalry. The formation of the Indigenous coalition was a remarkable feat. By 1876, Sitting Bull had united the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes, historically divided by language and custom, into a confederation bound by a common cause. Encamped along the Little Bighorn River, their village sprawled across the valley, teeming with families, warriors, and a shared sense of purpose. Historical accounts, such as those preserved in the Smithsonian Institution's archives, describe a vibrant community with teepees stretching for miles and warriors preparing for the fight of their lives. This unity stood in stark contrast to the fragmented approach of the United States Army, which underestimated the scale and resolve of their adversaries. Custer, tasked with subduing the hostile tribes, embodied the arrogance of a nation convinced of its superiority. His prior successes, including the Washita Massacre of 1868, where he attacked a Cheyenne village, bolstered his confidence. Yet, as historian D. Brown notes in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Custer's underestimation of Indigenous tactics and numbers was a fatal flaw. Reports from scouts, including those of Mitch Boyer, a mixed-blood Crow interpreter, warned Custer of the massive encampment, but he dismissed them, believing his 7th Cavalry could overwhelm any opposition. The stage was thus set for a collision not only of armies, but of cultures, with the Lakota and their allies fighting for survival against a nation determined to dominate. Visual elements critical to this narrative include a dynamic map illustrating the Black Hills and the Little Bighorn Valley, highlighting treaty boundaries and gold rush encroachments. A portrait of Sitting Bull, his piercing gaze capturing his resolve. An image of Crazy Horse, elusive and unphotographed, represented by a warrior's silhouette against the plains. A depiction of the sprawling Indigenous encampment, vibrant with tippies and activity. And a photograph of Custer, resplendent in his fringed buckskin, exuding confidence. A point of historical controversy emerges here. Did Custer's hubris, as some historians argue, or systemic failures in military intelligence and coordination, as others contend, precipitate the disaster? This question will unravel as the battle unfolds. On the morning of the 25th of June, 1876, in the Little Bighorn Valley of Montana Territory, the 7th Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, advanced toward an encampment of Lakota, Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. Custer's force numbered approximately 650 men, while the Indigenous coalition under the leadership of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse comprised over 2,000 warriors. The core metric of this phase, the rapid escalation of combat, with Custer's initial assault collapsing within hours. The battle, marked by chaos and ferocity, would expose the limits of Custer's strategy and the brilliance of Indigenous tactics. As Custer's column crested the hills overlooking the Little Bighorn River, the sprawling encampment came into view, its teepee stretching across the valley like a living tapestry. Scouts had warned of its size, but Custer, driven by ambition and the desire for a decisive victory, pressed forward. Dividing his force into 3 battalions, he sent Major Marcus Reno to attack the southern end of the village, Captain Frederick Benteen to scout the flanks, and led his own detachment of over 200 men toward the heart of the encampment. This decision, as historian Nathaniel Philbrick argues in The Last Stand, was a critical miscalculation, fragmenting his already outnumbered command. The Indigenous response was swift and coordinated. Sitting Bull, though primarily a spiritual leader, had inspired the warriors with visions of victory as recorded in oral histories preserved by the National Museum of the American Indian. Crazy Horse, renowned for his audacity, rallied the warriors with a cry attributed to him by Lakota chroniclers: "It is a good day to fight, a good day to die." Leading a force of Oglala, Lakota, and Cheyenne fighters, he outmaneuvered Reno's battalion, forcing it into a chaotic retreat across the river. Reno's men, pinned down on a bluff, suffered heavy losses, their plight described by survivor Sergeant Charles Windolph as a whirlwind of bullets and arrows. Custer, unaware of Reno's predicament, advanced toward the northern end of the village, expecting to crush the encampment in a pincer movement. Instead, he encountered a tidal wave of resistance. Warriors, including Gall, a Hunkpapa Lakota leader, and Tumun, a Cheyenne chief, enveloped Custer's detachment. The Indigenous forces, leveraging their knowledge of the terrain, used ravines and ridges to conceal their movements, as detailed in archaeological studies of the battlefield conducted by the National Park Service. Their tactics, fluid, decentralized, and relentless, overwhelmed Custer's rigid formations. Warriors fired from horseback, loosed volleys of arrows, and charged with lances, creating a maelstrom of violence. Custer's men, now isolated on a knoll later known as Last Stand Hill, fought desperately. The battle's intensity is captured in a Cheyenne warrior's account, relayed through historian Thomas Marquis. "The soldiers stood like rocks, but we were too many, like the waves of the river." Custer, resplendent in his buckskin jacket, rallied his troops, but the numerical and tactical disparity proved insurmountable. The question of Custer's decision-making looms large. Did he press the attack out of overconfidence, or was he unaware of the coalition's strength due to faulty reconnaissance? This controversy, debated by historians like Robert Utley, underscores the battle's complexity. Visual elements essential to this section include a dynamic battlefield map tracing Custer's and Crazy Horse's movements, a depiction of Reno's chaotic retreat across the Little Bighorn River. An image of warriors charging on horseback, their faces painted with resolve. A scene of Custer's men entrenched on Last Stand Hill surrounded by smoke and dust. And a portrait of Gall, his fierce determination emblematic of the coalition's unity. The battle's momentum now hurtles toward its climax, with Custer's fate hanging in the balance. On the afternoon of the 25th of June, 1876, in the Little Bighorn Valley of Montana Territory, the Battle of Little Bighorn reached its ferocious peak. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, commanding a detachment of over 200 men from the Seventh Cavalry, found himself encircled on a knoll, now immortalized as Last Stand Hill. Opposing him were over 2,000 Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, led by the indomitable Crazy Horse and inspired by Sitting Bull's vision. The core metric of this moment, the annihilation of Custer's battalion in less than an hour, a testament to the overwhelming force and tactical brilliance of the Indigenous coalition. The scene is one of unrelenting chaos. Dust and gunpowder smoke choke the air, pierced by the war cries of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors and the desperate shouts of Custer's men. Custer, standing tall in his buckskin jacket, directs his troops to form a defensive perimeter, their carbines blazing against the relentless tide. Crazy Horse, leading a charge of Oglala Lakota warriors, exploits the terrain, sweeping around the hill in a crescent formation as described in oral accounts preserved by the American Indian Historical Society. His strategy, fluid and adaptive, contrasts sharply with Custer's rigid tactics, which falter under the weight of numbers and ferocity. The warrior's assault is relentless. Gall, the Hunkpapa Lakota leader, drives his fighters from the south, avenging the loss of his family earlier in the battle, as noted in historian Joseph Marshall III's "The Day the World Ended at Little Bighorn." Tuktani, Two-Moon, a Cheyenne chief, leads a flanking maneuver, cutting off any hope of retreat. Arrows rain down, and bullets find their mark, felling soldiers and horses alike. A survivor's account from the Reno Benteen defense, recorded by Captain Frederick Benteen, describes the distant sounds of Custer's battle. A thunder of hooves and gunfire, then an eerie silence. Within moments, the outcome becomes clear. Custer's command is doomed. The decisive moment arrives as the warriors close in. Custer, wounded but defiant, falls amid his men, though the exact circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery, as no soldier from his immediate detachment survived. Archaeological evidence, detailed in studies by the National Park Service, reveals a chaotic scene: spent cartridges, shattered weapons, and the remains of soldiers strewn across the hill. The Lakota and Cheyenne, fighting for their survival, leave no quarter. The battle's brevity and brutality underscore a point of historical contention. Was Custer's defeat the result of his tactical errors, as argued by historian Evan Connellan, Son of the Morning Star, or the inevitable outcome of facing a unified and tactically superior force? Visual elements critical to this climax include a vivid depiction of Last Stand Hill, with Custer's men surrounded by swirling dust and attacking warriors. An image of Crazy Horse, his war paint stark against the chaos leading the charge. A scene of Gall's warriors pressing the attack, their lances raised. A battlefield map highlighting the encirclement of Custer's position. And a somber image of the aftermath, with fallen soldiers and abandoned equipment littering the hill. The battle's conclusion marks not only the end of Custer's command, but also a fleeting triumph for the Indigenous coalition, setting the stage for the consequences that follow. On the 25th of June, 1876, in the Little Bighorn Valley of Montana Territory, the Battle of Little Bighorn concluded with the complete destruction of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer's detachment of over 200 men from the 7th Cavalry. The Lakota, Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho coalition, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, numbering over 2,000 warriors, achieved a stunning victory. The core metric of this aftermath, the loss of 268 United States soldiers, including Custer, against an estimated 40 to 100 Indigenous casualties, a disparity that shocked the nation. The immediate aftermath was a scene of stark contrast. The Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, exhausted but triumphant, mourned their fallen while celebrating their defense of their way of life. Sitting Bull, whose spiritual leadership had galvanized the coalition, reflected on the victory's cost, reportedly stating, as recorded in oral histories by historian Stanley Vestal, We have killed the soldiers, but more will come. Crazy Horse, ever the pragmatist, prepared for the inevitable retaliation, aware that the United States would not let such a defeat go unanswered. The encampment sprawling along the Little Bighorn River began to disperse as families and warriors moved to evade the pursuing army. For the United States, the news of Custer's defeat arriving on the eve of the nation's centennial celebration was a national humiliation. Custer, once lionized as a hero of the Civil War and Indian Wars, became a symbol of both martyrdom and hubris. His death, as historian James Donovan notes in A Terrible Glory, galvanized public opinion, fueling calls for vengeance. The Army intensified its campaigns, deploying thousands of troops to subdue the Lakota and Cheyenne. By 1877, Crazy Horse surrendered under pressure and was later killed under disputed circumstances, while Sitting Bull fled to Canada, only to return and face confinement on a reservation. The legacy of Little Bighorn is profound and multifaceted. For the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, the victory was a testament to their resilience and tactical genius, yet it marked the beginning of the end of their nomadic freedom. The United States government, determined to crush indigenous resistance, escalated military and political measures, culminating in the erosion of tribal sovereignty and the confinement of native peoples to reservations. The Black Hills, promised to the Lakota by treaty, were formally annexed in 1877, a betrayal that remains a point of contention, as evidenced by ongoing legal battles documented by the Indian Law Resource Center. Custer's defeat also entered the realm of myth. He became a polarizing figure, celebrated by some as a tragic hero and condemned by others as a reckless aggressor. The battle itself, as analyzed in scholarly works like The Killing of Crazy Horse by Thomas Powers, raises enduring questions. Did Custer's arrogance precipitate the disaster, or was the outcome inevitable, given the strength of the Indigenous coalition? This controversy invites reflection on the clash of cultures and the consequences of unchecked ambition. Visual elements essential to this section include a somber image of the battlefield strewn with fallen soldiers, a depiction of Sitting Bull in exile, his expression resolute yet weary, a scene of Crazy Horse's surrender symbolizing the end of an era, a map showing the post-battle military campaigns, and a photograph of the Little Bighorn Memorial standing as a testament to the battle's enduring significance. The Battle of Little Bighorn remains a powerful lesson in hubris, resilience, and the collision of worlds. What can we learn from Custer's failure and the triumph of the Lakota and Cheyenne? Share your thoughts and join the discussion.